Hello. I had a phone call last night with a very dear friend who happens to also be the author of this gem of a book. This is called The Gratitude Game, and it's by Suzanne Cambray, who is a very dear friend and also a superb nutritionist. And she has the sun in Cancer in her chart, which means that her world revolves around assisting and helping those who are vulnerable, whether they're human or not. I'm lucky enough to be one of the vulnerable humans that is on the receiving end of her superb care. But she has written a book called The Gratitude Game for children. And I found that the inner child in me has been profoundly touched by this wonderful book. And there's a few reasons for that. And I started to talk about those reasons with her last night. And I said, I'll make a video of this so that what I'm saying is kind of captured for you, you know. So the first thing that struck me with this wonderful little book is an illustration. There is a page, I read this out yesterday. This beautiful book has more, it's more illustrative and less wordy. But the words of this say, Charlie knew that we are all connected to nature, to the animals, the stars, the trees, the flowers and the earth. And then there's this little picture here. You see this little picture here? Yeah, you see that there? Yeah. And it says, he felt his heart connect to all living beings, and he rested in the safety of his surroundings. And that image of a child reminded me of something that I hadn't thought of for quite a long time. In the 1980s, when I was doing my explorations of things, I stumbled upon a book by someone called Michael Bentine. And I knew Michael Bentine from doing children's TV things in the early 70s called Party Time, which were rather fun. And later on, in my teenage years, I got to know of a BBC radio comedy phenomena called The Goons. And originally, Michael Bentine was a member of The Goons. And so I saw this book called Doors of the Mind. Doors of the Mind. And in it, one of the things he mentions is what he calls the door-marked summer. And in his book, his autobiographical book, The Doors of the Mind, this notion of the door-marked summer, it caused so many readers to want to know more about that particular thing that it led to the door-marked summer. And he recounts that when he was a young boy, his father was Peruvian, and his father became ill. I can't remember what the illness was, but he had to slow down his work or even stop. And so to fill in time, he began to explore some things because when his father was young, he saw a ghost. Well, he believed he saw a ghost. So he invited dowsers, mediums, table rappers, people who do automatic wetting, all this kind of thing, round the house on a regular basis. So Michael Bentine's childhood was kind of filled with psychic experiments and developing one's psychic skills. And he said that when he was young, he used to go up onto the South Downs in southern England, lay down on the grass, close his eyes and just feel the buzz, feel the whoosh of the earth. And that's exactly what that picture in that book reminds me of. And Michael Bentine was a fascinating man because he grew up developing a sense of the psychic, a sensitivity to spiritual dynamics. When World War II came along, he applied to become a pilot in the RAF, but his eyesight wasn't good enough, so he became ground crew. And he found that he was based on a station that did bombing raids, night raids. And he found that when he walked into the mess for that evening meal, he'd see certain faces turn to skulls. And he knew who wouldn't be coming back that night. when the planes began to warm up their engines ready for takeoff, he would lay down on a bunk, put himself into a meditative state, and consciously astral project out of his body, and then fly off with the planes. And during the raids uh, over Europe, he would kind of attempt to telepathically or psychically inform the pilots when there was an enemy plane nearby. And that was his part of participating in a warfare that he couldn't physically engage in. After D-Day, most people were being sent overseas because the big push towards Berlin was happening. And like others, he found himself landing in Germany. He said that as soon as he touched the soil, he could feel death in the ground. He said the smell of death was everywhere. And in his little kind of army unit, occasionally they'd go off looking for something to eat, see if there's a restaurant, a cafe, somewhere to kind of, just have a bit of light relief. And on one of these kind of nighttime forages, missions, they were coming back to base and the driver got a bit lost. And they found themselves driving down this long kind of single track road. And there was what was up ahead looked like some kind of industrial unit. All of a sudden, the hackles went up on the back of his neck. And he found himself screaming. And he didn't have any rationale. They're going, what's wrong? He said, I don't know. Just go back, just go back, go back. And the driver didn't pay any attention to his cries and pleas to go back. And the Jeep drove in through the gates of Belsen in the dark. And he was in the first vehicle, Allied vehicle, to go into that place. Years later, I saw him being interviewed on Michael Parkinson, and he said that there were piles of bodies and they were still moving. He was so deeply affected by this that he cried, literally cried solid for 3 months, round the clock tears. They had him on drip feeds to stop him from dehydrating. He couldn't stop crying. And after the war, he figured that one of the ways to clear shadow vibration from one's system is to laugh. Not a sarcastic laugh or a mocking laugh. No kind of laugh that kind of causes pain to another, but a dwarfing, hysterical, witty, funny belly laugh shakes out the shadow and it lightens you up. So he became a comedian, literally, deliberately, to lighten up the country. And he spent a year or so traveling around the country, playing in the music halls and making, theatres of people laugh. And that's why he became a goon, and he ended up doing Party Time. The Dormark Summer is fascinating stuff. Towards the end of it, he talks about the Nazis' relationship with the occult and why that wasn't brought up at the Nuremberg trials. He talks about the cameraman biases in news items. He said it might not be that there's a policy of bias, but he refers to an interview he saw with Margaret Thatcher and Neil Kinnock, and said that if you look at it, you'll see that the picture, if you like, of Margaret Thatcher, the camera's looking very slightly up, and her face is in soft focus. Whereas the Neil Kinnock part, the camera's looking very slightly down, and there's a bit more of a glared lighting. It's sort of unyielding, and you can see his spots and cracks and things in his face. Just because, cameramen also have a bias, and they quite unconsciously adjust lenses, etc. Right? And if someone's got, a political bias, which they would have because they're a human, then how they portray something can have these very subtle differences. I thought that was that was the first thing that alerted me, if you like, to the way that media plays a role. And he talks about that at the end of the book. Highly recommend Michael Bentine, Doors of the Mind, and Michael Bentine, The Dormark Summer. And it reminded me of something else when I was talking to my friend, because One of the things that struck me about 5 or 6 years ago, someone I cared about deeply had a friend who was very ill and was leaving life. And I did a bit of telephone psychobiology work with him, and he responded very well to it. He had a breathing problem, and he wrote to me that he had had the first good night's sleep in a long time. So I thought, oh, that's good. He's responding to that. And I knew he was really into music. So I turned the little scripting of that inner healing work into a song called Breathe, which I've since used as the opening for the inner light meditation. And sadly, his health deteriorated and he never got to hear Breathe. But I was invited to visit the hospital to meet him and see him. And I wrote a song dedicated to his life. So I asked my friend, tell me some things about him. And I just had scant bits of information, but enough to kind of write a little kind of witty ditty about him. And I took my guitar to the hospital and set it up and did a Facebook Live. Sadly, that's connected with the old profile, so I can't access that video anymore. But I live streamed me singing this song to this man who was in his hospital bed, not knowing that he was so close to the end of life that he died within the hour. And I thought, wow, I just sung a tribute to someone's life as they're leaving life. Could you imagine that? Like 1,000 years from now, you do a past life regression and you find yourself with a stranger standing next to a bed that you're in and they're singing a song of you and they've never met you. And that's the sound that kind of vibrates your leaving. What a thing to do. And I was invited to his, I don't know what you call it, requiem memorial. And in this memorial thing, I heard two people reference the Dormark Summer. So that told me that he'd also stumbled upon this book. And there was like a connection there. So I was talking with my friend about this and how the picture in this book reminded me of that man, that moment of singing his life, and also of Michael Benteen and the things that inspired within me. And there's something else that inspires me within this. And that is that whenever I send out an email, at the bottom of my email, I have a quote of Albert Einstein, which in short says, we must free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. And I share that because he's considered to be an exceptionally intelligent man. And I kind of figured years ago, if you're going to follow someone who's highly intelligent. But there's someone else that I would give value to. And that's a man called His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in 2008, I was fortunate enough to spend a week listening to the Dalai Lama. My wife at the time was in doing Buddhist training, and she was part of a Dharma group. And the Dalai Lama came over, and he spent 5 days with these people in Nottingham Arena. And the first 2 days were open to the public. So there were children and things there. Then the next 3 days was like a private thing, with only half the stadium full, just for this Dharma group. And the Dalai Lama kind of talked about Buddhist texts. I hadn't read any of these Buddhist texts. I'd never even heard of them before. But I was surprised and quite delighted to find that I could follow about 90% of it, which I thought, oh, that's cool, because that means I'm either sharp enough to follow it, or there's a part of me that's sort of remembering things, right? But there was the last part of it was amazing. The last day, I got an invite to go and be in the audience of the Dalai Lama debating in Oxford University with the heads of departments, including the head of life sciences, and to watch the Dalai Lama discuss questions that were put to him by these academics was an incredible incredible thing. And in Nottingham, over the 2 days that were public with the children present, he said a phrase. He said it about 3 or 4 times. And his phrase was, we must have infinite compassion for all sentient beings. It's a nice thing to say. In the 3 day section, when it was just the Dhyana group, he mentioned it again, only this time he elaborated. And it took him an hour to describe the benefit of expressing or exercising an infinite compassion for all sentient beings, how it reinforces your inner strength. It does something to your sense of self, your identity, your confidence as a human being, to exercise as best you can an infinite compassion for all sentient beings. And that resonated with the Einstein thing. And so I really like that, you know. I thought this is very cool indeed. This book, The Gratitude Game, has that resonance. During the book, our character, it talks about, you know, when life is tough, when life has shadows, and how to find the silver linings by finding anything you can say about the world around you or your place in it that you are grateful for, even if it's just, I have gratitude for the air that I breathe, right? And she says in this book that the more you do this, the more a feeling grows within you, a feeling of inner strength. And that core light of inner strength will carry you through challenging times. A short version of the Dalai Lama's discussion on having infinite compassion for all sentient beings. And I said to her, this book takes me there, into that place where I reconnect or have a deeper sense of that light within me. You know, this little slim book is absolutely beautiful, and not just for small children, but for anyone who has a vibrant inner child, which is all of us, right? This is just superb. And it's wonderful in its simplicity. It's wonderful in its ease of expression. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I can't recommend it enough. And yeah, I said to my friend that reading this kind of takes me into that place that I found when listening to the Dalai Lama. It takes me into that place that I find when I read that quote of Einstein. It's beautiful. And so, yeah, if you know people who could do with having a more profound sense of light within them, and or if that refers to you on occasion, you know, because life is an up and down thing, isn't it? It's an undulating wave. We don't live in a permanent summer. You know, we have winters and springs and autumns emotionally. And there was one of the my very early experiences of getting involved in esoteric training and things in my very early 20s was I made contact with a group of pagan people, and I was invited to meet them at a place in Windsor. And there was this priestess lady, and she looked very regal to me. She was a tall lady, was about 20, 30 years older than me. And to me, it was like she didn't walk, she glided along the floor. You know, her robes went down to her feet, and you couldn't see her bounce. She just kind of glided like she was on a hoverboard. And towards the end of this evening of me twinkly-eyed, wide-eyed listening to people, she said, "You're doing very well." I said, "Am I?" She said, "Yes. You haven't said a word all night." Not realizing that was my normal shyness for the time. I never used to speak at all. But she knew I was taking everything in, you know. And as she was leaving, she said two things to me. One thing she said was, you won't find it in books, she said. It's within you. and I didn't know what she was referring to, but I remembered it. And then the next thing she said seemed more odd to me. And she said, and remember, there are evergreens. And then she enigmatically flowed through the doorway. And I didn't see her again. And that thing, remember, there are evergreens. I didn't know what that meant until years later when I had a relationship end. My great work colleague, who's still my friend now, we've known each other 38 years, took me out with another chap for the evening, and we had what could be best described as a rather raucous pub crawl. And I realized in that moment, the evergreens are your friends. And when I teach, I show my students a wall of books from my library, and we're talking about how to learn. And I let them know, well, you've got a choice. You can memorize this lot, option one, or understand it. So then you can figure it out for yourself in real time. And that's actually faster to do. And I always, when I do that, you see the shock in their faces when they see the wall of books. It's funny. But I introduce them as my friends. So, oh, I now want to introduce you to my friends. And I show them these books because to me, books are my friends as well. And this is an evergreen. I'd highly recommend it. The Gratitude Game by Suzanne Cambray. I'll put a link with this video in the comments and also as its caption as well, just so you can check it out and have a look. I highly, highly recommend it. It touches on a deep level, really does. I'm quite stunned by it, I have to say. You know, I feel very proud of my friend to have created this as well. But also, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for being touched by it. Quite literally, the Gratitude Game fills me with gratitude for its existence. It's a wonderful thing. And so I said I would do this video. Thank you for watching it, if you watched it. And I'm going to go before it goes on too long. Take care. See you very soon. Bye.